All right. Well, we just wanted to welcome everybody today. Uh, we're pretty fortunate to have Lee Schaefer with us, and we'll give you a couple minutes here to get everyone into the meeting, and we'll get started about 2-3 minutes from now. Okay. Just a reminder to everybody too. This will be a recorded event, and so we'll send out the link afterwards, and you'll be able to share it with friends and family if you'd like, or certainly can go back and rewatch it if it's that exhilarating, which we're anticipating. So in any event, we'll get started here. So Lee Schaefer joined the Star Tribune in 2012 after 15 years in business as a consultant, analyst, and investment banker. He has twice been named Best in Business for his columns by the Society for Advancing Business, Editing, and Writing. He is a graduate of Macalester College and received a master's degree from Northwestern University. He currently lives in St. Paul with his family, and we're happy to have him today. So without further ado, Lee, will hand it over to you. And we did want to just mention one thing, that Lee is expecting and anticipating some good question and answers after this. So please think about what questions you might have, and he'll take them at the end here after about 20 minutes or so. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, and thanks for having me be part of this. I am Lee Schaefer. I'm with the Star Tribune and have been since 2012. My background is a little bit different than virtually all of my colleagues, and that's because I started my first newspaper job at age 51. I'd come from 15 years in business, and the people who brought me to Star Tribune thought that my business background would lead to some different kind of writing, and it certainly has, but in at least one very surprising way. They didn't expect any columns that talked about life satisfaction and happiness and the limits of material wealth. That story started back when I was a consultant, and I was looking for some sort of defining edge, as my then partner was looking for marketing contracts as a consultant. I was not a marketing expert, so I needed to come up with some way to define what I did and how I added value to the team. And I hit on behavioral economics and how human biases really shape decision making. Bear in mind that I didn't develop any genuine and deep expertise, but I really did read a lot. And it started with the work of a guy then writing personal finance for the Wall Street Journal named Jonathan Clements. And I started clicking on the hyperlinks that would take me back through the piece in the Wall Street Journal to the actual studies, the economists and the psychologists. I also started reading books, and once you've read one, it's easy to go on to another one. And one particularly memorable one was called Stumbling on Happiness. It was by a Harvard psychologist who wrote about how bad we humans are at predicting what can make us happy. They had a section that described how you start off adult life pretty happy. It slips a lot in middle age and doesn't really recover until the kids move out of the house. At the time, we had 2 middle schoolers and 1 in high school, and it was discouraging to read how long I had to wait for my happiness to recover. When it comes to personal finances, in a nutshell, I found that the research is really quite clear. Material possessions and an ever-increasing level of personal wealth really add very little to a happy life. Once you get out of real insecurity and unmet needs and settle into life where your needs are generally being met, having a lot more won't do that much more for you. Yet I kept finding new aspects to write about, particularly in how people feel about their wealth. One column that I wrote that got a lot of reader feedback arose because I'd stumbled on an in-depth survey one of the big wealth management firms had done with thousands of their clients with more than $1 million in investable assets. In any practical sense, having that much wealth meant you were rich, given that the median household net worth in the country is something around $100,000. Yet that's not what the survey authors found. And of course, those results were not surprising at all. The people who had about $2 million in net worth reported that they would feel secure if they had $5 million in net worth. The people with $5 million thought that they would get to security if they could get their net worth to $10 million. The people with $10 million seemed to settle on $25 million as the level of wealth that would make them feel secure. My observation is that if you can't feel secure at $10 million or $25 million, there's not much that's going to help you feel secure. I guess you better keep up the hard work. Another thing I found is that affluent people were not just interested in growing their wealth and feeling more secure, they were also really eager to feel virtuous. I'm basically talking about upper middle class people here, not hedge fund managers or CEOs, or just the people in my professional network. These affluent people were really sensitive to any hint that luck may have played a part in their growing affluence. That the right place, right time, the right parents, the right gender, picking the right industry out of school, being the right generation, and so on. They didn't want to believe that that mattered very much at all. And this is another one I simply stumbled onto by writing about those college savings plans called 529 plans. They have been a tax advantage boon to the upper middle class, but they do relatively little for lower middle class people. And all the innocent Minneapolis Star Tribune columnist did was point that out. I also asked in my column whether there are other forms of college finance that could do more to help kids from less affluent families get into college and stay there. And my email in basket filled up. Lots of angry readers. And that's what brings us to the topic of decluttering, because that's where wealth and feelings of real virtue seem to really come together. By now, there have been a lot of books and articles about how to do decluttering, and not just organizing your stuff, but actually cutting down the number of things a person owns. You know, move to a smaller house, sell one of your cars, give away your golf clubs, dump all the clothes that don't fit anymore. A charismatic young writer and consultant named Marie Kondo became a celebrity based on her thoughts on decluttering. She famously asked readers to pick up an item and determine if it really sparks joy. And if it doesn't, that item might be a candidate to be given away to Goodwill or maybe just tossed out. For me, I think that's an impossibly high bar. There's very little in my house that sparks real joy. And I mean, there's stuff I need to use from time to time, but I mean, really, how much joy can a Toro snowblower really spark? In preparing for this talk today, I ran across a news item at my desk that ranked the top 59 decluttering apps for iPhone and Android. It was stunning to me that there were even 59 apps worthy of being rated and ranked at all. I would have guessed 5. Yet we all know that keeping possessions around to show off your affluence and relative success in the world, or to improve how you feel about yourself, has come to be the wrong side of the argument on stuff. To be virtuous now means getting rid of your things, or doing your best to declutter. Of the articles on decluttering I dropped in the file was one that maybe was the most aggravating of all, and I subsequently wrote about this in the Star Tribune. It had appeared in the New York Times, written by a wealthy internet entrepreneur who had cashed out for well into 8 figures. I wish I could describe for you quite the tone he used in this piece, how he got rid of his big house and turbo car in Seattle, along with his 1,900 square foot loft in lower Manhattan, and almost everything else he once owned. My space is small, he wrote, but my life is so big. He didn't have any kids in his big life, so he would have no idea how much sense it is to actually own a place safe for kids to live that are near some good schools. He had no idea about the things that kids might need, like bikes to ride, toys to play with, hockey equipment to wear. Having no further need of a house means he also wouldn't have needed a Toro snowblower or a leaf blower. You know, maybe my owning a leaf blower is really unnecessary, but the part of his essay that was most aggravating is he did not seem to understand that what it meant for him to also have a really fat bank account. He did not need to hang on to the stuff he had because whatever else he wanted, he could simply buy without really thinking about it. So he didn't buy a new TV for a little stimulation. Instead, he moved to Spain. In my research, I ran across a blog written by an engineer who insisted he could spot wealthy people on the street just by how little they carried. Being mostly in the lower end of middle class himself, every day he filled his backpack with the stuff he needed. He carried a 3-year-old laptop computer, so he needed the charge cable. He always carried a charge cable with him to keep his old cell phone going too. He packed a water bottle and food in case he got hungry. He used transit to get to work, so he always packed a raincoat and gloves. If he were rich enough, he would have only carried an ultralight laptop computer and a new iPhone. Every other need could be met by spending a little bit of what was in his wallet. Hungry? No problem. There's a coffee shop available on almost every block. His backpack turned out to be a metaphor, really, for how a lot of people live. These are people struggling to pay bills or trying to stock up on food, so they likely need a freezer. They use a window air conditioner sparingly, and they keep a big box fan or two handy for hot July days. In Minnesota, a car really isn't a luxury, and you might need to keep two junkers around to improve the odds that one of them actually runs. If this seems far-fetched that people don't really live like that, just know that my father-in-law once had 2 refrigerators in his kitchen. I tried explaining to him just how much power it took to run both of them, and we had given him one, thinking that he would get rid of the other one. Neither refrigerator seemed to work very well anymore, but he was always hesitant to get rid of one and have picked the wrong one, like the one he kept would then immediately stop running. Consequently, he kept them both. If you have a bunch of old stuff in the house that you have to keep working, it's probably true that you have a pretty sizable junk drawer. I have a pretty good sized junk drawer. I don't know how many of you have all done this, spent time in a mini storage facility, but once I flew to Los Angeles to help one of my kids move back in for her second year at college, and we forgot the lock to the stuff she stored over the summer. Actually, she forgot it. I'm being generous by saying we forgot it. So we sat there for 3 hours until the locksmith finally got her in, and I got a chance to watch people come and go to a public storage facility. We got the chance to see their stuff. Now, most of it looked like the kind of furnishings that might have been bought new at Target, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. They had boxes filled with, Lord knows what. It's always dangerous to generalize based on people and their appearances, but I think it's safe to say that I didn't see any wealthy tech entrepreneurs there. The thing is, I've yet to read any article praising decluttering and the joys of living light from somebody who has never had the money to accumulate a lot of nice things in the first place. Those people at the Pasadena Public Storage, they wouldn't appreciate any preaching about the virtues of living with fewer nice things. They've already tried that. It's what their life is like all the time. And one of the things that's just occurred to me is that maybe this decluttering trend that began some years ago has taken a hiatus during the pandemic. Through the last data on this kind of stuff, spending on goods is up a lot compared to 2019, while spending on services has declined a lot. Some of this makes sense, how the pandemic has reshaped our spending. We buy those big cans of beer called crowlers at breweries. That's a goods purchase, rather than going in and spending some money on beer and services with a tip. There's also been research that affluent households that have been buying Minnesota Wild tickets and traveling abroad and spending some nights at the restaurants, they've had their checking account balances build up to the point they need to spend their money on something. And so they're spending it on what they can get over the internet and e-commerce. As you can probably tell, like a lot of affluent people, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship going on with a lot of my own possessions. For advice on decluttering your house, I'm not your guy. Maybe try one of those 59 apps out there, or borrow one of Ms. Kondo's books from the public library. In fact, I have only one piece of advice to give people on possessions, and that's to work really hard to keep them from coming into your life in the first place. The thing that works best for me is something I learned some years ago while doing an almost comically pointless consulting assignment for Johnson & Johnson. Those folks had really big budgets, and among their consultants was the late Clayton Christensen. He was a Harvard Business School professor, best known for originating the theory of disruptive innovation. I never got to meet him, but his books and articles were lying all over the J&J facility in Ohio where we worked. And that included an article that laid out what people are really doing when they buy a product. As he put it, people were hiring a product to do a specific job for them. And what they really wanted done wasn't always obvious to them. Christensen told of his experience as a consultant on a milkshake project hired by McDonald's to tell them how to increase sales when a lot of the things that they've recently tried didn't seem to move sales one bit. After staking out some restaurants, his research team of graduate students saw that nearly half of the milkshakes were purchased before 8 a.m. in the morning. The people who bought them were almost always alone, and it was almost always the only thing they bought. Even the milkshake buyers couldn't really answer the subsequent questions about what they were trying to do. But over time, it eventually became clear. The milkshake buyers were all going to go on a long, boring, by themselves car commute into work. What they really needed was something to do. So the thicker the milkshake and the longer it lasted, the better. So McDonald's took this research and changed the recipes again, and sales finally increased. A case in point about this whole jobs to do teaching comes from my own experience. I didn't quite know what job I wanted done with a new product when I last bought a new car. It was back in the days when I was an investment banker and I drove around in one of those little Beetle convertibles. It was a high-end model, quick turbo, really fun to drive, but when I went to go pick up a prospective client for a dinner meeting, he refused to get in the car. So I let the lease roll off. I found a substantially bigger and nicer Volvo to drive. And as I look back on that episode, I always ask myself how I could have been such a fool. Getting to work wasn't the job I was hiring that car to do. The guy who refused to get into a VW bug car wasn't somebody I was going to enjoy working with anyway. Yet I hired a car at roughly $50K MSRP for the job of telling the next guy like him that I was a serious player in the capital markets. So now when it comes to new purchases, here are my favorite questions to ask. What could I hire that would do the job nearly as well, preferably something I could rent or maybe even already own? What am I really hiring this thing to do? And do I really need to get that task done at all? That seems to stop a lot of stuff from coming into my house. Well, that's what I have for you today. I hope this was helpful. I enjoyed going through some of my old research to prepare, and I appreciated the opportunity to share with you all. Now maybe we have some time for questions. In the past, as I give community talks, people always wanted to hear about Sid Hartman, and unfortunately he's no longer with us. But I have 41 more years to go to match his record. So I think I'm going to make it.
Yeah, thank you. We have a few questions here that we'd like to ask you. I think people have been reading your bio because they're going right after maybe some of your background with being an investment banker and an analyst. So I'll just start with the one that might be the elephant in the room, although it doesn't have much to do with the decluttering, would be, as it's stated, with the seemingly retail-led short squeeze with GameStop, AMC, BlackBerry, one that you've been following as of late on social media is the Blockbuster. Do you see these extreme market events having any lasting impact on short selling and hedge fund operations? So we're just going to jump right into it.
It's a great question. As it turns out, I am going to write about this. It's the open file upstairs in my baronial bedroom closet office. And this does remind me of the late 1990s. You know, those of us with silver hair, you know, we don't operate Zoom so well, but we do have a little bit of experience. And it wasn't Reddit then, it was chat boards. There was a famous short squeeze here locally with KTEL. You know, they had they said they were going to put CDs on the internet, and that quintupled their stock price, and there was a short squeeze. There was an almost comical in the proportions chat room boom in a company called iOmega, which was originator of the zip disk. I think it peaked at about a $15 billion market cap. I think EMC finally acquired the assets for $100 million. So that's what we're seeing now. The speed at which things happen these days is faster. I think the Reddit crowd, the Robinhood crowd, is also using options in a way that, you know, creates more volatility and gets the price swings to move faster. But I don't think it's a particularly a concerning trend. It's happening in a handful of stocks. The broader market is not moving very much. It's obviously dangerous as hell for the people doing it.
Right.
When GameStop, which is a fine little company, is trading at 9 times revenue or whatever it is, somebody bought that stock. You know, somebody's going to buy the high trade. I don't know who that is, but it's not going to work out for them. You know, and then to AMC, and you know, and then when they crowded into the rental car company that was bankrupt. You know, when they, you know, the Blockbuster was funny. You know, it's like Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy in 2010. I didn't even know there was still stock out there. I kind of wanted to call RBC and say, hey, can I get in this Blockbuster action? It's a fascinating thing. It's essentially mob behavior, which seems to be quite fashionable these days. But I don't think it's got long-term implications for the capital markets, how we do so.
So kind of on that topic, and then looks like we have a couple more questions that we can back into that are more related to the decluttering. But as a frequent critic of Bitcoin ranging back to 2013, has your viewpoint evolved at all since then?
Bitcoin still looks like a shiny bauble to me. I don't understand the arguments of the fans that it is a store of value, because anything that volatile doesn't really work like that. As a medium of exchange, anything that volatile doesn't really work like that. If you get paid in Bitcoin, you're taking enormous price risk unless you dump it that very moment, right? And there's also a lot of technobabble out there about the evils of fiat money, and you know, and you know, that's sort of my view of this. Digital gold, you know, I'm not a big fan of gold either. It's famously unproductive. Gold doesn't pay a return. You won't get a dividend. It's not building anything of value. Where these fit in a portfolio, I really don't know. What I am, you know, intrigued by is, you know, things like when the insurrection took place at the Capitol, there was a payments company that cut off the Trump store. You know, so you couldn't buy from them. It's like, well, wait a minute. Does a payments company have that kind of a right? Who else are they going to cut off? You know, so some sort of a greater clarity and visibility and transparency in our payment system. That seems like a good thing to me.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. We have another question that just came in. Looks like the question is, do you recommend giving gifts of money to family? Our net worth is growing when we don't need it to grow, and we are thinking we may as well bequeath it to family now as opposed to later. And is this wise? And obviously this is probably a question that maybe you've come across with some of your past background, and I suppose has to do with some financial decluttering. But what are your thoughts on that, Lee?
It's a very interesting question. Of course, there are you know, if you're going to just straight up gift it, there's tax limits on that. Can I tell a story? I've been involved in a small nonprofit in North Minneapolis called Urban Homeworks, and the sort of the founding executive director, he talked about serving two groups of people who had a problem. There were people who didn't have enough money to have a decent place to live, and there were other groups of people who literally had too much affluence. Of the two groups of people that organization served, he wasn't sure which one was more important. So the idea that your wealth is rising, and ours has. I never expected to be as rich as I am right now. You know, I'm 60, so I'm on the doorstep of retirement. You know, so we're seriously thinking about what to do about it. We're going to end up donating more than we'd ever planned, and we're probably going to transfer at least some assets to the next generation. How much is the right thing? These are hard questions. I don't know. Financial advisors are good people to talk to, and so are spiritual advisors. I don't think it's easy. I really don't.
Well, and that's a good question. And one of the things we've seen a lot of momentum on too, and been helping people with is, donor advised funds, which is something that gives you the tax benefit now, but maybe some more time down the road to be able to be more thoughtful in where you're giving your money. So we've seen a lot of momentum and traction there, and obviously, this is an anonymous question, but whoever had that, we'd be happy to help you sort through that. Another one would be that, are you aware of any incidents of hoarding among affluent people? If not, or if so, why do you believe that is?
I personally don't know of that. I do know that it takes place. And one of the things that will happen to people as they age and actually get more affluent is they become more fearful. And you can certainly see this in late mid-career people, even though that sounds goofy, right? People in their 40s, right? So they've had career success, they've got a very nice life, they've got six-figure compensation, well into six-figure compensation, and they just think one mistake could just spin them down. A layoff, an illness, something like that. And I have talked to people about that. It's a fearfulness or a lack of a sense of security. And I don't really know what the fix is in terms of hoarding possessions or stacking up stuff. That I've not heard of, but I suppose it could happen if there's not a way to deal with your fears. And maybe that's part of that middle age, your happiness dip situation. Where you're just afraid of tumbling down the ladder somehow. And I think that's a lot of what's driving our political culture right now. It's anger and fear. It's not enthusiasm for change. It's anger and fear about the threat of change.
Sure. Thank you for that. And another one that's kind of tied into the economy would be with what some are calling the K-shaped recovery. What repercussions and what possible remedies do you see happening in the near and far future?
Excellent question. The near term, it seems to me, is really an understanding of what's meant by stimulus. We don't have a demand collapse recession. We have a different kind of recession, and some people are doing fine. I mean, I'm under house arrest like everybody else, but I've kept my job, I've kept my health. I couldn't go to the gym anymore, so I bought, a bike, and I pedaled that downstairs, and so to stay fit. It's okay, right? And that's true for a lot of white collar professions. It's a lot of businesses are actually doing okay right now. The people who are not doing well were largely in services and largely lower paid workers. That's the bottom part of the K. And So why do we need stimulus or do we need relief? In other words, we need targeted aid. And I don't know how to do that. I mean, if I were really smart about this, I'd volunteer to go work for the governor or go work in the Biden administration, and I'd want nothing to do with either one. But that seems to me to be what we ought to be doing. To kick everybody out a $2,000 check, I don't need it. I really don't. Lots of people in Ramsey County, in Hennepin County, really do like it, like a real difference maker for them. Stay in their apartments, get their car fixed. They could really use that money, and I don't need it. So how to do targeted aid or relief is sort of what I'm interested in hearing more about, and I haven't heard much about it.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's an interesting take. We haven't read much about that. It's still the beginning of a new administration, so we're waiting to see what exactly happens. But yeah, it's an interesting point. We do have another question if you want to pivot over to policy question. So the policy question is, we're about to see a big debate about increasing taxes on high earners and corporations in Minnesota. Your thoughts?
Boy, it's a perennial hard question for me personally as an observer of our world. And the problem about all state-by-state policies is you have to compete with other nearby states. And while by most measures, Minnesota has a great quality of life, to be, leading the regional pack in total tax burden seems unwise in the long term. People do have alternatives. Roughly a year ago, I was asked to go talk to a group in Florida, which was fine. I knew the people involved. The whole room was full of Minnesotans. It was estate taxes. It was fourth tier income tax. The whole room was full of Minnesotans. I think there was a guy who was from Florida, aside from the wait staff. And with the mobility of capital, if you create tax policies that force capital out, it becomes self-defeating in the long term. So there you go.
Thank you. Let's see here. Looks like we have one other question, and maybe this is something that you and I had kind of talked about beforehand, but how do you choose what to write about, and how is that different than what news reporters do?
Good question. So I'm an opinion columnist, and I consider myself gently opinionated compared to like the sports guys who will call for the dismissal of the Timberwolves coach on a random Tuesday. I don't call for the dismissal of the Target CEO. But I have a surprising amount of freedom, surprising to anybody in business. Because I've had people call up and says, "Why did they make you write that?" It's like, what do you mean by they? And what do you mean by me? The way an assignment comes to me is that, a few years ago, Wells Fargo's board did an analysis of the scandal, and the boss walked over and said, "Lee, are you interested in this Wells Fargo board report?" And I said, "No, Tom, I'm really not." And he said, "Well, if you were interested in it, tomorrow would be a good day to write about it." And I said, "Oh, okay, I get it." I said, "Well, I suppose I can go find the report." He says, "Oh, I happen to have printed it." And he handed it to me. That's as close to an assignment as I've ever gotten at Star Tribune. So I have a freedom to write about, kind of whatever I want, and I don't have anybody dictating a conclusion to me. Today, for instance, I have an editor who's really interested in the GameStop thing. He just thinks this is the most fascinating thing he's ever seen. And as soon as I chimed in on Slack, so that's how we're talking to each other now. We're on Slack. As soon as I chimed in and says, "Oh, this reminds me of K-Tel in 1998," he says, "Oh, I never heard of K-Tel." It's like, I don't know how you can live in Minnesota. I've never heard of K-Tel. Don't you have a pocket fisherman? I mean, anyway, so that's how an assignment is going to end up coming to me about this situation. But the news reporters, I mean, we've really struggled in the recent past with what's meant by objective and what these kinds of things. They are really tasked with giving you a straight news account of what's happening. that's kind of why I'm off by myself. You know, I'm not on a team. I have a boss, and I really miss my colleagues. I went into the workplace every day. Yeah, I am kind of off by myself. I don't work with news coverage in quite the same way. And one other thing is, like, remember when you first took kids to a bowling alley and then they had to stick those bumpers up to keep the gutter balls from happening? Sometimes when you have too much freedom, you can write whatever you want. You roll a gutter ball, you know? So I've rolled a few gutter balls.
Well, thanks for the honest assessment. Looks like we got one other question here, and right now it appears that that's the only one in queue. So might be wrapping up here in a few minutes unless something else pops up. But the question is, what's your greatest accomplishment among your different professions? And I think, just as a reminder, Lee, I think you have a background in a little bit of compliance as well, which I don't know if there's any good stories there that go with that, but you have the floor.
Oh, thank you for that. That's a great question. I'll tell you a story that leads to the point. So when I was a consultant, I did corporate development, a lot of corporate development. It's like you wanted to buy her firm, and I'd help you do that because you were busy. And I wasn't a great deal guy. When it came to fighting over the asset purchase agreement, I wasn't great at that. But a company called Intercon, still publicly held, still in the Twin Cities, really good people. They had an operation in Anaheim, and I said, Mark, you're not going to be able to sell that. He said, what do you mean? I said, there's no buyer for something like that. You're going to have to shut it down. He said, wait, he said, oh, really? What's that? I go, well, you have to get out of the lease. You have to, you're going to have to work with the customers to make sure you don't cut them off. You're going to have to do stuff with the employees to make sure that they're treated fairly in outplacement service, work up a benefits plan. The suppliers are going to be, as soon as you give a whiff that you're going to go out of business, they cut you off. You got to have, work through the inventory. It's just a hell of a lot of work. He looked at me and he says, oh, would you go do that for us? It's like, no, I don't want to do that. That's not what I do. That's a drag. And well, every Monday morning for quite a few weeks, I flew to John Wayne Airport, drove over to Anaheim, and I shut that facility down. And at the end of that process, 59 of the 60 employees had a job. Only one person did not. None of the suppliers lost a nickel, and none of the customers missed any deliveries. And I feel pretty good about that. I mean, the way you do that is you communicate again, you communicate again. You never change your story. The details of how you get out of the lease are secondary to doing those things. And that was kind of, and at the end, the people up there at Intercon, they were friends of mine. I solved a big problem for them, something that on paper I wasn't qualified to do. And I had a fee arrangement and they tacked $50K onto it. I said, Scott, you can't do that. He said, I just did. I'm not getting a new check.
Did they give you that in stock shares, hopefully?
Well, they didn't. I would have taken stock. But that's an example of if you go into a shutdown situation and what you care about are the people, and you could imagine a person sitting at her desk who relies on your company's product to build her product. If you can imagine her, see her in your mind, and what she needs to do to get her work done, and how you're going to affect her. That's what we did, and it worked out.
Well, that human component is huge. That connection, and with us being in the pandemic right now, I would imagine that people are excited to get back and socialize.
Yeah.
Some of what we've read, and there's been a lot published, is the Roaring '20s. A repeat of what took place there. What are you seeing in terms of where you think people are going to spend their time and how they rethink society? Are there things that are permanently changing from your viewpoint that will just be here to stay, besides the virus?
Well, I've thought a lot about that. Things that change forever. I do think that those of us who've really missed our personal interaction in the office, I don't think work from home is forever and not for everybody. It really penalizes young people, for instance. When you're a young person, one of the ways you get trained is not training classes, it's listening to the phone calls of the older staff members. If you go into an organization and you're in your 20s, the people who end up becoming your friends are the other people in their 20s. It's not the 60-year-old managing director, even though he may treat you beautifully. So I think it penalizes young people. So this work from home thing, I think flexibility, yeah. Not having to be there every day at 8 o'clock, yeah. Not having to be penalized if I want to leave at 4, that's going to be true. But I think that stays. The other thing that I worry about is what's called productive capacity. Like a bunch of these restaurants have gone out of business. The skills are there, but their capital got wiped out. And so how long that takes to come back, all sorts of things. A wedding banquet hall in the suburbs. And there's a bunch of them around the Twin Cities. How do they come back, and did they get wiped out in terms of their capital? These are concerns, but the skills are there. The chefs, they haven't gone anywhere. They haven't gone to seminary. I think they're still chefs, and so with some capital, this industry can restart to be vibrant, and that's what I really hope.
Okay, and along those lines, we had another question come in, and they say, where do you think the real estate market will be by year end, multi-housing and commercial? And then second part to this question appears to be, will the malls recover ever? So you understand the spirit of the question there.
Yeah. Let me take that one first. And the malls are fundamentally changing. Burnsville Center has been, went into foreclosure and been taken over by somebody. But the city of Burnsville had an area study on this region, and they showed that an aerial photograph, and you can't walk the Burnsville Center. If you tried, you're taking your life into your hands. But that's not the way we live anymore. So some of these sort of patterns of living that have changed are affecting the malls. E-commerce and the ability to ship on time and stuff you actually want, they moved 5 years in a year. So that I think changes retail. What we do value still are experiences, and some of that's going to be in retail spaces. Restaurants, entertainment, those things I think are really valuable. I've tried some VR stuff. I know a tech enthusiast who says we're going to watch Bears Vikings on VR and we're going to get the same view that Kirk Cousins has. I was like, I don't know when that happens, but being there, that's a different experience. Just to feel the energy of the 60,000 other people. That's a different experience. I think so. All those experiences, facilities, I think have a future. The big DCs, distribution centers, obviously that's big. The question mark I have is really office and what happens to office. I'm reliably told some of the lease renewals for law firms are smaller. They're going to be smaller. If that takes a while to work off that inventory and absorb that excess space, I don't know. So that's the big question mark.
Okay. And that is one of the questions that we got here, as well as kind of a follow-up to that. So with the multi-housing and commercial, one that was recently asked here was that future of commercial real estate, but then, i.e. office space. So it sounds like maybe that's more of a question mark for you at this point.
Right. I do think that work from home, the idea work from home is the new normal. I really don't buy that. It works best for people my age, but think about the 20-somethings in your office. Their social networks still aren't really formed, and their ability to train and pop up and ask a question. There's young people at our place, and I'll get a Slack message. Lee, do you have a few minutes to talk? And I'll put a message right back. Yes, call right now. That would never happen if we were physically there. She would have just appeared at my cube. It would have been 40 seconds. I would have helped her. She would have gone back now, and she was hesitant to do it. For all I know, she's been thinking about this for 4 hours. So I think that physical thing really does work, and I don't see work from home. You know?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, and I think that a lot of people are feeling better about getting back to work with where the vaccine is headed. So maybe back to policy a little bit. It looks like there's a question here about do you expect talks for universal basic income to become more mainstream in our current politics?
Well, if somebody's done their deep dive on me, they know that I've written about that. I'm not optimistic in the short term, but I do like that approach. And I like it more than minimum wage. I know minimum wage is the way a lot of policymakers on the left are viewing how to do something to raise the incomes of low-wage workers. And, you know, it's a mandate. You're forcing a small business person to do so. I would much rather have it be a universal basic income approach than that. But I think it has a long way to go. There's a pilot going on in the city of St. Paul, as a matter of fact. And I don't even remember where they got their money. But I mean, I think it has a long way to go here. Every time I wrote about universal basic income at Star Tribune, I think I've done it twice, my in basket just lit up. You know, by 4 o'clock on Sunday, you know, I had quite a few people who were really upset about that. And that's part of the American culture. There's this weird sort of thing, you know, where, you know, we want to help people, but we really don't. And we have this tussle. It goes back, so it takes a while. That's my view.
So another kind of just interesting thing that's happened across the country and is maybe moving a little bit slower here in Minnesota, but questions around policy and just thoughts. It looks like there's some legislation with online gambling, and just what are your thoughts on how that and recreational use of marijuana would impact a culture and a society like Minnesota, where they value their health and maybe the slippery slope that can lead down? Or do you think these are things that will be pushed forward with an agenda in the state of Minnesota, and how do we compare to other states that you see, you know, draw parallels to?
With respect to legalization of marijuana, I do expect that to happen, and probably sports gaming as well. You know, I'm not a huge fan of either one. You know, and I know their internet is out there, and it's really easy to bet on NBA games if we really want to. But I'm not a fan of either one. I think they're both corrosive to some degree, and I guess I'm more worked up about gaming than I am about recreational marijuana. I don't want to be generational either. Here's Grandpa Lee, you know, saying something critical about it. I mean, I kind of get the argument for it. I've even heard police chiefs. I was on a panel once where I was the moderator of the panel, and we had a police chief talk about favorable. You know, we've got to bring our laws and expectations up to the reality of the way people are living. But you know, the expansion of gaming I'm always leery of that, because invariably it ends up just bankrupting and ruining a decent percentage of people. It really does.
Yeah, it seems definitely like that topic would affect overall wellness, right? And with the pandemic, people that have not been able to do the gambling, we've seen a lot of that shift over into the stock market with some of the stuff we talked about before. Where do you see the overall theme of this run up here of speculators in the market going? I mean, do you see this money supply getting pulled back out of the market at some point, or is this? I mean, is this something that will continue on with people jumping into the market because they're bored and they can't do anything else except gamble on stocks now?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, we know how it's going to end in a way, right? The bear market is going to take over. We don't know when it's coming. If we had that kind of talent, we'd all be much richer than we are. But the kind of speculation we're seeing right now, it does seem like it's not going to end well. I saw something called TikTok Investor. TikTok, there are these very young people, and they're talking about how they were funding their lifestyle trading stocks in Robinhood, and the dude says, this is what we do. We go look at the stocks, we find out which ones are going up, and we buy it. And then when it stops going up, we sell it. And his companion says, it's just that easy. And they were 20-somethings, and it was like, OMG, really, you're a danger to yourself and others. You really are. And again, we've gone through periods like this before. It's like the apocryphal story of the financier in the 20s who got stock tips from the shoe sign stand. We're at the point where we're getting stock tips on Reddit and Twitter. The founder of Barstool Sports pulled the letters out of a Scrabble box, formed tickers for what he was going to buy. He says, like, you can't make that stuff up. And that was an interesting point. I was like, with the people who wanted to bet on NBA games when the season was canceled, they all went over to Robinhood and started buying options. I mean, it's like, this is not going to end well. But I'm an investor. I always say this to people. You can do a few things with your money. You can save, you can invest, you can trade, and you can speculate. That's about it. I got no interest in speculating, and I got no interest in trading. But if you want to do it, you can open up a Robinhood account and knock yourself out. I don't think it's going to go that well.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. We've had more questions, in the last couple of weeks around OTC stocks than we have, for the last couple of decades. So it's been interesting. It doesn't look like there's any other questions that we have in queue right now. And, we've chewed up about 52 minutes here. For anyone that's still with us, we thank you. Lee, were there any other comments or thoughts that you had that you wanted to add to the group? Otherwise, we'll look to wrap up here.
No, just let me say thanks. This was really fun for me. I learned something from the questions, so thank you.
Well, we appreciate you giving us some time, and we'll look for that column on GameStop if the editor has his way. So we'll keep you in mind there. And thanks again for your time, everybody, and I hope you enjoy your day.
Thank you, everyone.